What do you think? The potential for a Netflix killer out of Apple today?
Well, it's definitely going to be competitive, and it's definitely going to cause Netflix investors to take a step back and think about what this is going to mean for Netflix's growth. So I do believe that over the next year, this will be negative for Netflix. It's really shocking that the stock is up over 50% in the last 3 months. Well, this has been well anticipated. So, but I do believe over the next year, this will weigh on Netflix stock. I don't think it will kill Netflix, and the simple reason is this, is just like Spotify, that exists. It doesn't exist particularly well. The stock hasn't done anything in the past year since it went public. But just like Spotify and the music side, I think that the video streaming services can have multiple players. And I suspect that over time, you can have consumers with 2, 3, or even 4 of these $15 a month type of subscriptions as they pare back their traditional cable offerings. So Netflix will have a place within that longer term.
But would you be telling people to sell Netflix ahead of this if you think it could cause some problems over the next year? As we see, not just Apple doing this, but you've got Comcast that's coming out with its streaming service. You've got Time Warner or AT&T preparing its service now, too. And all the ones that were already out there maybe really trying to beef things up with the potential of what Amazon does, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not be owning Netflix. I should have been more clear about that earlier. I think longer term there'll be a survivor, but I would not own the stock. And the simple reason, you talked about the competitive piece, which is well known about just other offerings out there. I want to caution, though, that on Apple's side, that there's only going to probably be 10, 15, or maybe even 25 shows announced today. It's going to be relatively small versus Netflix's 1,000. But I would not be owning Netflix for the simple reason that it's going to get more competitive. The company is spending money. I think that this a lot of times gets largely overlooked. They're spending, this $5-8 billion a year in content, but they're taking money out. They're taking debt out to fund that. And obviously, other players like Amazon or Apple don't need to pull a debt lever. And last is the distribution piece of something like Apple, what that can bring. The 1.4 billion devices. That's the reason why Spotify stock largely hasn't worked since its IPO a year ago, is that Apple Music has essentially accelerated based on their distribution that they have.
By the way, did I hear right that, Gene, that Apple is going to give us free, those Apple users will allow us to have the free access to their content? Did I hear that right?
Yeah. I believe the Journal's reporting that. It's hard to say what the exact economics are going to be initially over the first 3 months. Eventually, this is going to be some form of a paying service. But think of it probably over the long term as something like $10 a month, slightly below where Netflix and HBO is.
That's going to be terrific. The thing I don't like about Netflix is these cliffhangers. I hate that.
You're going to dig into the programming on it?
I was watching Marco Polo, and then they left me hanging there. I mean, come on, at least conclude something. It's a real problem.
We're very used to binging and getting everything we want when we want it at this point.
God, what the final episode of The Sopranos do to you? No one knows what happened there.
Exactly.
Really?
Same idea.
That's right. Just keep believing.
Gene, for Apple shares in particular, because they've done so well with services, because that's been the kind of hidden thing that the street wasn't anticipating, what could this mean longer term?
It's a big deal, and that's what's so important about the move today in the services. And it's been a subtle move because they started doing things like Apple Music a few years ago with the Beats acquisition. So it hasn't been like a product announcement. But this is as profound of an impact on the Apple story as when they got into mobile devices. We're going all the way back to the iPod. And the reason why this is so profound is that finally the company is finding ways to monetize its massive base, and these services will build on top of each other. So we have music that's out there. We're going to have video today. There's going to be a news service. It's not going to be particularly exciting that will also get announced today. But more importantly, over the next few years, you're going to see other services, whether it's AR, augmented reality related services, whether it's something in healthcare, potentially something in transportation. I'm be clear, I'm not saying that Apple's going to come out with a car, but there could be some sort of service layer that they could power, that they could work with traditional auto OEMs. So I think that this is an important shift. Why is it so important to the stock? Is finally investors, as that segment of their business grows bigger, can get comfortable with paying Apple finally getting a multiple that they deserve.
You know, I'm beginning to see how strong Apple is because I had a very bad experience with Microsoft. I had a Microsoft computer. I'm sitting in Brazil, and it goes black, and there's no service. So I'm switching over to Apple, and I can go to anywhere in the world and go to an Apple store and get service. And that's an amazing development.
Microsoft doesn't have service.
Doesn't have the service.
I didn't realize.
They said, look, we'll replace your computer, but I want the memory in the computer.
Right, right.
And they couldn't do anything.
They couldn't
about
get it back for
It's
you.
a real problem.
I didn't think
So I
that.
think the thing with Apple is this is all coming together: the service, the product, and also now the content, which is really going to be amazing, I think.
Hey, Gene, in terms of what content Apple is going to be able to offer, that's where I still come back to. Will they get premium services that will be bundled in with that? Or is it going to be basically a bunch of ragtag content teams where they feel like they can't offer or charge for a subscription themselves, so they figure if they get bundled in, maybe they get more eyeballs? What I wonder is if somebody who already has a successful subscription model, why would you bother doing this? And wouldn't that really put your brand at threat? Which makes me wonder how big of a deal this is actually going to be.
So I think in terms of size of revenue and the impact, I do think it's negative for Netflix, even though we're talking about 40 shows by the end of 2020 versus Netflix at 80. And I do think that anything that moderates growth is going to have an impact on Netflix stock. The content, one of the challenges is this PG content, likely filter that Apple have because they are so meticulous about their brand. And the best performing content is the content that's more provocative. And so how they balance that, I suspect that they're not going to have some of the most provocative HBO Vice type of content that tends to do well. So yes, that does. You're right, Becky. That will have an impact in the amount of people. But that's the bigger picture is this is a new offering that will chip away at the market, and they have obviously the bandwidth and the capital to continue to fund the high quality content.